on a Friday afternoon to hear this important information today from our Regent universities on NIL and revenue sharing and how it affects the universities. And I know that Chancellor Girard is itching to get going so that he can catch a flight to the Super Bowl that we made him late for now, so we postponed this. And we appreciate the universities for coming in today to take the time to talk to us about this. This started a couple of months ago. I was having a conversation with the Chancellor, and he was trying to walk me through kind of some of the issues that are going on in college athletics. And I thought it'd be a good idea to have them come in here. So I requested their presence today, and they made this happen for us. So we really respect your time and appreciate that you're here. And we'll go ahead and start with the presentation. Committee, it's in the S drive. It's also, you have a hard copy in front of you. And we'll go ahead, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started with Chancellor Girard. Thank you, sir, for coming in.
There we go. Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. And I would echo the gratitude for you taking time on a Friday afternoon of a big weekend. I think we would all agree on multiple levels. And it's an honor for us to be here to share with you a little bit about what's happening in the current state. And I say current state, it could be different tomorrow. And that's the world that we live in right now. And I'm happy to be here. Obviously, I'm the Chancellor, Doug Girard, Chancellor at the University of Kansas, but I'm really here on behalf of my partner Division I colleagues. So Kansas State, Wichita State, and all three of our institutions are represented today. In case I get the questions that I can't answer, which is very possible, is our athletic directors, Gene Taylor with K-State. Stand up, Gene. So they know who to point the arrows at. Travis Goff from the University of Kansas. And Kevin Saul from Wichita State University. So you got the best of the best minds right here in our state when it comes to collegiate athletics, and they're here to help answer any questions you might have. I've in my 8th year now in this role, which means I've been on the board of directors for the Big 12 Conference for 8 years. I'm currently the vice chair. I'll become chair of the Big 12 Conference in June. I'm also the vice chair, soon to be chair of the AAU, which is our research university organizations. And so I've been pretty deep in this topic, not like these gentlemen, but pretty deep in this topic. And I would say probably 30% of my job is in some way, shape, or form tied to collegiate athletics. And that's probably not going to lessen as the years go on. I've had the opportunity to testify in front of Congress on this issue. We have the topics that we're going to cover today. I've been part of 2-day conferences to cover these topics. And so this is not a straightforward issue, and it's evolved pretty quickly, but we're really appreciative of the opportunity to come and give you all an update on this, of where we are today. There's really no doubt, and we'll see some evidence of that, of the economic value of our athletics programs, certainly to our universities and most definitely to the state of Kansas, and you'll hear more about that. You'll hear about some of the legal changes that are coming down the pike at us that it really will completely reshape, again, the landscape of collegiate athletics and some of the challenges that will present for our institutions. So if you, do we have the slides, or are we going to go off our handouts?
Do you have slides loaded? All right, let's get them emailed to you real quick so people watching from home can see them. Would you take care of that? Dell, do you have his? Okay. You can go ahead and start, and we'll get that up.
I'll keep going, sure. So, again, what I'd like to accomplish today is really a brief history of the NCAA and how we have worked for a number of years, but then share some key concepts of how that's really changed and how really the environment has changed to the funding of our collective departments. And as I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about economic benefit, but then really some key takeaways of where we are today and at least where we think we're going and some of the challenges that presents to us collectively. If you go to the history slide, you know, when the NCAA was formed 75 years ago, it was on an amateurism model. There was a definition of that, and by definition, those athletes could not be paid for what they did in sport. And it really created a national landscape for the setting of rules and for the enforcement of those rules, and therefore also the ability to create national championships. And really in recent years, and I'll share a slide on sort of some of the history, that model has changed pretty dramatically. In today's model of name, image, and likeness, really loss of enforcement control by the NCAA and really the Wild West right now, which is that there's actually very little enforcement happening right now at all. If you go to the second history slide, which is really the evolution, you can see, and I won't go into all these, but you can see really the courts have redefined this landscape. Through a series of lawsuits that have come against the NCAA. In some cases, one or more conferences are involved in those lawsuits. And the federal courts over time have increasingly said you cannot restrict benefits to these athletes. And it's come kind of in a stepwise fashion. If you look through these various cases, the O'Bannon case being the first big one, then you started seeing states having legislation weighing in, saying the NCAA cannot restrict things for the athletes. And then really in 2021, the Alston case, which is really that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the defendants, which were the athletes bringing this case, won 9-0. And what came out of that was a statement that the NCAA is not exempt from antitrust rules. Having a national landscape violates antitrust rules, is basically what the court said. And that really launched us then into where we are in the current environment. And going on at the same time of all of this, we've seen a lot of conference realignment as well. If you go to the next slide, where it talks about conference realignment since 2010. That's just since 2010, but that's really where most of the movement has taken place, starting with the Big 12 started to change pretty dramatically with Colorado and Nebraska leaving, and then later Texas and A&M. 2018, Wichita State moved into the Missouri Valley Conference. And then 2021, when the Big 12 started its multiple evolutions, of which we are currently in the third form of that since I've been on the board. And all of that resulted in the collapse of the Pac-12, which is no longer in existence, as the majority of the teams from the Pac-12 moved into other conferences. If you go to the next slide, it really is just a graph of the media revenue that flows per school to the schools from their conference. And I say media revenue because this revenue is generated through TV contracts, cable contracts, with the conference and their partners, the media partners, CBS, ESPN, Fox, et cetera. And you can see that there's quite a disparity between the conferences when you look at that as well, with the Big 10 up at $72 million, Big 12 at $32 million, Wichita State's in the American, which is at $7 million. And so that has created a really unstable environment as well in terms of it's what's driven a lot of the mobility of schools between these conferences. Has really been the dollars that the media contracts are able to provide the schools to be able to compete in this landscape. And I'm fairly confident this is not over. The changing of the deck chairs usually occurs when the contracts come due, and that will be 2031, 32. A lot of the contracts will start to expire again, and that's when I would anticipate we're going to see another shift. If you go to the next slide, it's titled Economic Benefit to Kansas. I want to lay this out a couple different ways. In that top box is a study that came out in 2021 when Texas and Oklahoma were leaving the Big 12. The Perryman Group did a study for our entire conference and said, how much money would your state lose if your schools dropped out of a Power 5 conference? There were still 5 of them then, now there's 4. And so they ran this study, and for KU and K-State combined, that was almost $600 million per year of economic activity that the state of Kansas would lose if we just moved from our conference to a non-Power 5 conference, and about 4,500 jobs. When you look at the raw data today for us in Wichita State, you can see that we have direct departmental spending there. We have our direct spending, which is what other people spend coming to our events. And that's what the direct spending is, and the total expenditures there for us, $223 million, and for Wichita State, $83 million per year, and the number of jobs that are tied to that underneath that. But if you go to the next page, there's really the results of an economic impact study that Kansas State just finished. And they did it, this particular study was for the economic impact of the athletics department by itself, not the university. Make sure I'm getting this right, Gene. just the athletics department, you can see that that's a $486 million annual impact on the economy of the state of Kansas in almost 4,000 jobs. So you can multiply that times the other institutions and get an idea of the scope of what we're talking about. If we go to the next slide where we really talk about the benefits to the university, and there's really no question on that. That top one is critically important. We know enrollments are dropping across the country. We know that our part of the country is going to see some of the biggest drops in the next 15 years. And that's going to continue to put enrollment pressure on our institutions, but it's also going to put significant pressure on our economy if we don't have the graduates to feed our businesses. So we know that athletics is a key part of our student recruitment. At KU, we just, over the last 2 years, have conducted a survey of our students, and 41% said one of their top 5 reasons they chose our institution was because of athletics. So there's no question this plays into the mind of our students as they do it. And a very clear example of that for us was 2 years ago when ESPN Game Day came to our football game, did basically a 3-hour infomercial on campus. We saw a 30% increase in applications in the first 2 weeks after that show. The power of being on the national stage for student recruitment is critical. It's critical for all our institutions, as we also want to make sure we keep the best Kansas students right here in Kansas. But we also want to make sure we can get the best students out of every other state if we can and bring them right here. Because we know, in our case, at least a third of those out-of-state graduates take a job right here in our region. And we import about 800 college graduates every year just out of KU, but my colleagues could say the same thing. So that's critically important for us on the student side, certainly on the donor engagement side. 40% of the dollars that we raise at KU come from outside the state of Kansas. So that's somebody living in New York or California or Chicago or Dallas is sending money to Kansas to support our institutions, 40% of the money. And we are in the middle of our capital campaign, which is at $2 billion right now raised. So that's a lot of money into the state of Kansas. Certainly, our donor engagement is very similar to our alumni engagement, and it's critical for that. And it's also critical for our ability to recruit and retain our faculty and staff. So we know there's great benefit, not just to the state, but really to our institutions as well. If you go to the next slide, really, this is a breakdown of how Big 12 institutions are investing in their athletic departments from the university. So this is not from the state, this is from the university. And if you want to look at the bottom, that's where you'll find us, with Kansas State at the bottom of that, KU a little bit above that, and Wichita a little bit above that. But that money that these schools are dumping into those programs are predominantly student tuition and fees. That's where that money is coming from. And so the students are really carrying the load of funding the athletic departments, and you should be proud that your institutions have been diligent to really try and create self-sustaining athletic programs that have required very little subsidy by our students to be able to keep those programs going. And you can see how uncommon that is. In fact, if you go to the next slide, it's just a bunch more peer comparisons. And I think on this slide, not all the names made it up there. I think that very top one is Cincinnati, who's now in our conference. But you can see some of these schools are pumping literally tens of millions of dollars to subsidize their athletic programs on the backs of their students for the most part. Clearly, we are not doing that. We don't intend to do that because we have worked very hard with you all to try and keep tuition down and to try and make our schools affordable. And we know we've heard loud and clear from you all. That's what should be job one. So we don't anticipate dramatically increasing prices to support our programs, but I think we'd also all agree that it's in our best interest to make sure these programs continue to thrive. So a little bit on the next slide is a summary of where we are today. So the most recent lawsuit that is in the process of being settled is called House versus the NCAA. What's not on there is that also all 5 power conferences were listed in this lawsuit as well. And it's a class action lawsuit. And a settlement has been reached, but it has not been confirmed by the courts yet. And that should occur the hearing is in April. Hopefully we will know in May whether this is our future or not. But what this really does is a number of things. If you start on the left-hand side, there's $2.75 billion of damages paid to athletes that played between 2016 and 2024. And that's the statute of limitations, which is why those dates are there. Our conferences will cover 24% of that. The NCAA will cover the majority of it. And really that payment comes from reserves at the NCAA and then reduced distributions from the media contracts collectively to offset that cost. And then the model going forward changes completely as well. We really will move away from the name, image, and likeness. And again, that model of name, image, and likeness, which we had out of a lawsuit also, created the platform for our students to go out and earn money from outside entities, not from the university. We were prohibited from participating in that, which is, you may have heard the term collectives. So those were organizations that were formed outside the university, could take in money, and they could pay it out to players. We have no visibility to that. We don't know if there's contracts. We don't know how much money there is. The universities, by NCAA regulation, could not be part of that. This flips that upside down. We now own this process, and that we will not be paying athletes. We will be sharing our revenue with these athletes. And they, through this settlement, have created a cap, which is this coming year, will be $20.5 million. And that's essentially, and it's based off of 22% of the average revenue of a Power I conference, of a Division I conference. That will go up every year with an escalator, and it'll be renegotiated every 3 years. And that money, you don't have to spend it, just like you don't have to do a lot of things in our world. The question is just, do you want to be competitive or not? And do you want to continue to drive the economy in the way that we do or not? And if you look at the right side, some other changes that go with that. We currently live in a model of scholarship limits. We can only have 85 scholarships for football, for example. That goes away. You can have as many scholarships as you want, but they limit the number of players. And so in football, that number goes to 105 capped. That means your walk-ons go away. There'll probably will be a lawsuit about that. But in this new model, there are no walk-ons, but you can scholarship 100% of your players. And so that environment changes pretty significantly as well. And how these revenues or these numbers were calculated was they went and looked at where the revenue sources were coming from with the media partners predominantly, but also other advertising partners, and determined that 75% of the revenue in our world is generated by football, and that 25% is generated by men's basketball, and 15% by women's basketball. To be honest, every other sport loses money, but in the grand scheme of things, they had 5% for everybody else. And so the courts determined that this was not a Title IX issue. This is a revenue generation model. This is not a benefit. And so they have determined that in how they are handling it is a distribution following this model of very football-heavy world, which we all know to be true in the media markets. So if you go to the final slide, really in summary, what we're trying to share with you today is that clearly these programs are critical to the success of our universities. It creates an incredible economic benefit to our communities and to our state. This environment is changing so incredibly fast. If we'd given you this talk 3 months ago, it would have been different. And it will probably be different 3 months from now. And so it's a very fluid environment, and there probably is going to be some federal regulation around this, we hope, to create some stability around antitrust and to stop the lawsuits. But we also know that to be competitive in this new environment, we're going to need to enter into this revenue sharing model, which really essentially adds another $20 million to our budgets, and we have no revenue stream to support that. So that's the dilemma that these gentlemen are trying to figure out. They've done an incredible job to date of figuring out how to do it largely on their own, but this is one I don't think they're going to be able to solve on their own. And with that, I think I will stop and open it up to questions. And feel free to ask any of us.
All right, committee. I was getting a question while you said that, sir, so I'm sorry. I'll open for questions. I've got a few, but I'll reserve mine to the end. Any questions, committee? Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this in fact eliminating the Rudy walk-ons, the Notre Dame Rudy, any walk-ons? Is it destroying that whole system? You don't have a chance. You have to be somebody that's of value in order to get into something.
You can do it, but you have to do it within the roster size limit. So you have to, in our case, you have to, in football, it would be, you can have 105 players, whether you have, the school will decide whether they're a scholarship player or they're a walk-on. You don't have to give 105 scholarships, but you can. And so it creates a lot of flexibility, but it also, in your case, so how many walk-ons do we have right now as these two guys with football teams?
35.
30 to 35 walk-ons in football right now, above the 80, that's above the 85, right? That's above the 85?
That's above the 85.
Right, so roughly a roster of 120 drops to a roster of 105. So whether you're a walk-on or scholarship, there's going to be fewer of them, to your point.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when we look at the slide on the institutional funding and we look at our peers and you have Houston all the way down to Kansas State, would you say that those excessive numbers that, for example, Houston spends 48,000, Cincinnati 38,000 from institutional, are they spending actually incrementally more than we are on our total programs? Or would you say most programs across the nation of comparable size are still spending the same amount of money total, it's just where they're drawing their sources?
It's a little bit across the board, and those numbers are in the millions. So that's 48 million that Houston is spending into their athletics. Their total athletic budget's actually smaller than ours. So the difference is that we're able, through all the things that we do, able to generate more of the money than they're able to generate to support their athletics program. Their total budget's less than ours.
All right, and that's what I was actually trying to figure out, is if we were behind the 8 ball, but it sounds like we are not. Thank you.
We're ahead of the game on that regard, but and ahead of the game in that we're not putting that much burden on our students. And you know, the Houston president's hope is that joining the Big 12 will generate some other kinds of revenue. They can lower that burden on their students. I mean, that's literally why they joined the Big 12. But they also have made some pretty big investments to be able to join the Big 12. And when the dynamic of the realignments occur, that's when you don't want to be, it's musical chairs, and you don't want to be stand-in when the music stops. And so how competitive, that's where the competitiveness comes in. If you're not competitive in football, if you have football, and certainly in basketball for both, there's a fair chance you won't have a chair when the music stops.
Committee, are there any further questions? Could you go back to the ESPN game day? What was the number of applications that came in the following couple of weeks?
We had a 30% increase in our applications in 2 weeks.
Just because game day came to town?
And then, of course, that doesn't mean they're actually going to come to our university. We have to be able to capture those folks once they apply. We actually captured 18% year over year to create the largest class we'd ever seen in the history of the university, by 18%. And we can track it pretty tightly. We've done a lot of other things to make sure we got that 18%, but we can track that as it's an incremental bump that we have been able to sustain, thankfully. But there's no question that there was a correlation there. And I would just add some other numbers if it's of value. We know, we just counted them last night, actually. We had 555,000 visitors to the University of Kansas for athletics events last year. 555,000.
Okay, so traditionally in the past, your athletics has out-generated the expense. Your revenues have exceeded expense. Is that going to stop now? You're going to be going into the negative on athletics because of these changes?
Yes.
So rather than, I mean, the excess funds went to support education, right, in the past?
So what is not buried in there is in current day, athletics writes a check to the university to the tune of $18 million. And that's for tuition, room and board, and some other services for student athletes. So right now, it's actually been a net positive to the university overall, as opposed to what Houston's doing in the opposite direction, as an example. The problem is they really can't afford to do everything in this new model. This is an additional 20 million into everybody's budget with no way to pay for it because they're already using what they have to your point, to break even, if you will.
And so this has got to be a discussion nationally, and what are some of these other states doing to address the financial issues of the lawsuit and the NIL and all that?
I would say everybody's scrambling. This is all, again, this is late 2024 settlement, so this is new on everybody's plate, and yet it goes into effect in July. So we got this model kind of dropped on us, and we know we have to implement it by July. So everybody's scrambling right now to figure out, obviously on our part, we've just gone through an exercise. We're going to cut $15 million out of our budget in athletics. That actually is just to break even before we add this. And so we're trying to be as lean and mean as we can. We're looking for new revenue opportunities, obviously, where we can. And we're working at the conference level to try and generate new revenue opportunities, but we're looking everywhere we can to figure out how we're going to do this. And if anybody tells you the answer, I don't think they're being honest. They'll all tell you they're going to spend the money. They can't tell you where it's coming from.
All right, so I'm on appropriations, and we just went through all the universities' budgets, and none of you asked for, there was no ask for athletics in any of the budgets. Do you suppose that's going to have to change going forward in order to stay competitive?
You know, the short answer is yes. I mean, we don't have an ask for you today. We haven't had time to really get together to figure this out, to come with you for anything. And we haven't had this conversation at the Board of Regents, which is where we start our process actually in August. So this wasn't even in place in August. So we are going to be having to figure this out pretty quick. But as I say on that last slide, there's no new revenue stream, and we cannot solve this on our own. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, athletic directors, you're welcome to weigh in on any of these questions if you'd like. What can we do to help? How about that? Outside of funds, what else can we do?
You want to share how you're thinking about it?
Gene Taylor of Kansas State University. It's a great question. Obviously, for us at Kansas State Athletics, we've been self-funded for a number of years. We're one of the few athletic programs in the country that get no institutional dollars, as it shows on the slide. And we're very fortunate at Kansas State that our donors have been very generous to us over the years from a facilities standpoint. The one good thing we have going in our favor is our facilities are in pretty good shape. So we're not going to be coming back to our donors and asking them for major facility capital campaigns. But at some point, the amount they're willing to help us is going to be limited. So right now, we're obviously, as Chancellor said, looking at every revenue source we possibly have from the external side. How can we find new revenue sources? How can we be creative? Obviously, controlling our expenses is big. But, you know, if you cut $1 or $2 million out of your budget, the impact on our athletes is very heavy, but it's like throwing the deck chair off the Titanic in terms of trying to come up with the $20 million. So right now, we're coming out with a campaign for our donors to really understand, doing the same thing, kind of educating them about what this means to us. But we have to find other revenue sources, and, you know, we're limited from the institution, and we just need to be creative where those dollars can come from. But other states are looking at this, and they are looking at funding their athletic programs. For other state resources, I don't know where, but Texas and Oklahoma and some of these states surrounding us are looking at ways to help their athletic programs through some funding.
And I would just add to that, as you can see from those graphs, the solution for several has been for the university to fund it. And that's an option, but really the only way we can do that, we only have two sources of revenue really, and that's you and our students. And in terms of, our research dollars, we get to do research and we have to use it, or I go to jail if we don't use it the way that it's given to us. So we don't have flexibility around those kinds of dollars, and so really it would be a significant burden on our students if we tried to swallow this as a university.
Yeah, so our tuition in the state of Kansas is extremely competitive compared to some of these other schools that are clearly offsetting their budgets with their tuition. So you're to be commended for that, and you're also to be commended for the two ADs sitting next to each other, less than 24 hours away from the Sunflower Showdown. So we'll see what it looks like tomorrow. Representative King has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you use endowment dollars to help fund some of this?
We can, and we do currently. I mean, one of the reasons that we've been able to do what we've accomplished through our athletics departments is our donors have funded it, but they are funding a lot today, and we are not going to be able to get a 20%, 30% increase in donations between now and July.
Yeah, but your university endowment, though, is that restricted, or could you use a portion of that?
All those endowment dollars are, well, will say that 88% of the dollars are restricted, meaning they're given, this is for a scholarship, this is for a professorship, this is to help build that building or that lab. We can't then say never mind and use it over here. That's not legal either. So we do have some unrestricted money, but we raise money today for our facilities, as A.D. Taylor just said. One of the other blessings of the state is all our athletics facilities, state has not paid for any of them. And yet you own them all. That's your asset. It's not my asset, it's your asset. But our donors have paid for all of that. And so we are fortunate that we have a phenomenal donor base that has done that for the universities and for the state of Kansas. But we're not going to be able to take it to this. We will work on it, of course, because that is an option, but we're not going to be able to take it to this level.
Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? We have a guest representative, Jason Getz, that has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad he got up because I wanted to do a little introduction. KU Athletic Director Travis Goff, me and him graduated in 1998 from Dodge City High School together. Did traveling basketball and good friends, and just very proud of you. I think it's awesome to have this little reunion here today. My question is around the kind of the relational aspect. We saw pretty prime coach in Nick Saban, kind of with everything that's going on. May have been a timing thing. This was kind of rumored that this was part of it. How is this affecting our coaches, staff, moving from their student athletes to now they're kind of employees, in a sense, of these athletic programs? How's that affecting the relational dynamics? What shifts are having to happen? What are you seeing?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Go ahead and introduce yourself first,
Appreciate
then answer the question.
Travis Goff, Athletic Director, University of Kansas. Certainly the dynamics have shifted when you think about coaches and their responsibilities and the notion of recruiting, retaining, developing, graduating these young men and young women. I think there's a number of variables in play. I'll say two things. One is when you think about NIL and when you think about revenue share, those generally speaking have been of greatest impact to the revenue generating programs. In our case at Kansas and Kansas State, that's football, and in particular men's basketball. Wichita State, that's going to be led by men's basketball. And it's an important storyline. That's where economic impact is generated. That's where we bring these visitors in so many ways to our campuses and to our communities. That's where televisions are attracting eyeballs across the country and across the world to our institutions and to our state, certainly. And so that's very much at a forefront. The other part of that story, which Representative Getz is related to, is the notion that while we're all striving to be able to deliver a competitive NIL and rev share model, we're also trying to preserve opportunities for a diverse portfolio of programs, obviously most of which are not revenue generating programs. At the University of Kansas, that means nearly 300 scholarships, most of which don't go to football student athletes, most of which don't go to football, men's basketball, even women's basketball. When you include them, they go to tennis student athletes, golf, soccer, volleyball, baseball, softball, track and field. And so we're really feeling that strain on both ends of that spectrum. We still believe in the value of which intercollegiate athletics brings young people to our departments, the pursuit of an education, the development that occurs outside of competition. And so we're really on both ends of this trying to make sure we're able to compete at the highest levels in the revenue generating programs, as well as continue to provide the rate opportunities we've had for so long. Back to that point real quick, Representative Getz, is to say there's success stories in what NIL has provided. We had an event last night. One of our football student athletes stood up and quickly told a story. He's a Topeka native. He told a story through NIL support that he's been able to receive. He has bought 2 rental properties, and he has also bought land in all places in the state of Louisiana, and has begun really building a business mind around investment, around his next chapter after football. And without resources through NIL, and in the future without rev share resources, those kinds of deserved opportunities go away.
You have a follow-up, Representative?
Yes, that'd be great. One you probably won't answer, but the second one, first one you might. The 20 million, I saw there's like a 4% possible increase per year. Is there then a cap out point? Is there a renegotiation when the new contracts come out? And then would you go on record if this is going to force Bill Self to retire, or if he's going to stay around for a long time? Thank you.
Which one of those am I going to answer, and which one am I not? They're both interesting, but so it begins at this juncture at 20.5 million. That is the cap that we have the ability to share directly with our student athletes. There are automatic escalators, and then it's recalculated every 3 years. And this is a 10-year settlement, so we can see as far out as 10 years from now, which I think the projections show this to increase to, at a minimum, $33 million. So that's kind of the forecast. Again, emphasizing annual and new to our budgets. The second question is beat K-State tomorrow. I think that's all I've got.
Committee, any further questions? And Kevin, would you like to address the committee from Wichita State?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just from a Wichita State perspective, and thank you to the committee, just understanding that the magnitude is a little bit different for us because we're a non-football playing institution, and we are the sole non-football playing institution in the American Athletic Conference. And so while the total numbers for us are different from a revenue share standpoint, we would never envision sharing $20.5 million with our 16-sport, 300 student athlete portfolio. But that number for us would be a very similar percentage to the numbers of my colleagues here at a 15 to 20% ratio for us to be competitive and recruit and retain elite level talent.
All right, thanks for that. You have something to add? Nope. All right, committee, any further questions? All right, thank you all for coming in. We really appreciate it. And the chancellor did have to leave to catch his airplane, and hopefully we didn't make him too late. Maybe he'll get a police escort or something cool. Committee, we are going to work the bill about the Beehive bill that we were talking about yesterday, the small business regulation changes. And Charles, what's that bill number? Yeah, HB 2158, and we'll get a brief description on what that bill does from the reviser.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. The committee will recall that this bill pertains to the Kansas Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and beekeepers. It provides an exemption from licensure for beekeepers that meet certain requirements. Those are listed in the bill on the first page. Basically, they are that the honey and honeycombs have to be packaged on the property of the beekeeper. The packaged honey and honeycombs have to be labeled according to certain requirements. The beekeeper has to include their address, the net weight of the contents. The beekeeper has to keep the honey and honeycombs unaltered, and unaltered is a defined term. It means left raw and in the original state after harvesting, and it doesn't include pasteurization. The hives or honeycombs have to be located in the state of Kansas. There is a specific provision pertaining to gross sales. So the beekeeper's annual gross sales has to be less than $50,000. The beekeeper has to maintain a record of the sales, provide that to the Kansas Department of Agriculture when requested. And the second section of the bill amends the licensing requirement under that act to conform with the first section. That's what the bill does.
Okay, any questions on the description of the bill? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. And for purposes of discussion, I have an amendment that I want to make to this bill that specifically removes the commercial kitchen requirement from any beekeeper, not just the small ones, but any beekeeper that is making pure, whatever the description is in the bill for unpasteurized pure honey. That way, the big guys don't have to be inspected, and little guys don't have to get the kitchen and or go out, seek out and rent the kitchen. And so that is a change that I would like to make. If I could get a second on that. Representative Ward is going to second the amendment, the motion for the amendment. Representative Wilcott. Okay. Charles Reimer, sorry.
To be honest, I'm not quite sure how to do that yet. But I'll certainly give it an effort. The issue is, you know, it appears that the act has two categories for licensing. One is a food establishment, and the other is a food processing plant. And so it would appear that beekeepers would probably be licensed under the food processing provision. And, you know, the regulations sort of all pertain to, now, you know, I'll, you know, do my best to write this up, but just, you know, just for the committee's consideration, you know, the regulations would appear to, you know, involving food processing, you know, it would require distinguishing food processing from, you know, with respect to a commercial kitchen from the other regs that apply to food processing. You know, one thing I did want to point out is that there is a Department of Agriculture regulation that applies to entities, food processing, that are exempt from licensing. And there are certain requirements that apply to food processing plants that, even though they're exempt from licensing, that they have to meet. And if the committee is interested, I could provide that information. But so just to note that, so the amendment would require distinguishing commercial kitchen requirements from other food processing requirements, and that would probably, you know, possibly require some interpretation by the Department of Agriculture, but certainly it could be done, so that's all I have to say on that topic.
Okay, so the intent would be for the larger beekeepers, even though they're licensed, that they would not have to have a commercial kitchen requirement if they are making only the pure honey, just like this bill was written for that exception.
And so I understand the proposed amendment as not exempting them from licensing as a food processor, but distinguishing within that food processing license requirements that would go to a commercial kitchen.
Correct. Representative Clayton with a question.
Yes, or not so much a question, but maybe a potential proposal. I would feel a lot more comfortable voting on this amendment if I had something to read in front of me. Would it be possible if we could just, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying that I want to know more. Could we possibly table this until we had a written amendment, maybe next week? Could be super fast. I just would feel better if I had something that I could read.
So in the interest of time, we've got 1 week left, and we've got like 9, 10, 12 bill hearings scheduled for next week. And so my intent is to get this out. You don't have to support the amendment if you don't understand it, in theory. But my intention is to vote on this bill today to get it out so that we can get it to the floor. We have, after next week, we're only going to have 1 more week to get these across the floor. So we need to get it out. Representative Corbett.
How does your amendment affect the dollar amount of the,
It does not. The dollar amount stays in. It would have been simple just to strike the dollar amount, and then all beekeepers wouldn't be required to be licensed or be regulated by having to have a kitchen, but the intent was to make sure that they just didn't have to have the kitchen.
I think the dollar amount kind of confuses things because it's always the cost of the pound of product or whatever that is. So the dollar amount should just, if you want to put a poundage on it, that's fine, but just, there's no need for it, really. We're just trying to get some honey made.
Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, both on the amendment and the bill, I'm kind of uncertain either way. One thing that I would like, again, this would require a delay if you're willing to do it, but if not, that's fine. But I did my sentence on House Ag for a couple of years, and the Department of Agriculture would always come in and at least give neutral testimony on why they think something is or is not valid. And since they're the inspecting agency here, that would be, I think, a good perspective to get.
Yeah, the intent is clear regulations, as many as we can. Vice Chair Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think with the amendment that it makes the $50,000 irrelevant. So with the amendment, it strikes that. So I think that answers the question of Representative Corbett. I mean, it's no longer needed.
So the $50,000 is still, my amendment did not remove that because that is what triggers them having to be licensed.
Not the kitchens.
The kitchen is is also an exclusion for under 50,000, and I'm wanting that exclusion to be for all beekeepers. Charles, did you have something to add to that?
No, just that I don't want to influence the committee's deliberations. I think it could be written to do that. You know, I would say something like no specific facility, you know, for the preparation of food or something to that effect.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions on the amendment? Representative Wilcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, because I may have gone off on a tangent here on the last one from the previous representative's question. So a beekeeper below 50,000 won't need a license. Anything 50,000 or above will need a license, but will not have the requirement of the commercial kitchen.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? All right, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All against say no.
No.
The ayes have it. And you want your vote recorded? Representative Clayton wants her no vote recorded. Representative Penn. Penn wants to be recorded as yes. Any further discussion on this bill? All right, seeing none, Vice Chair Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee passes out House Bill number 2158 favorably as amended.
Okay, I need a second on it. Representative Ward. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. All right, well, we're done with that. Committee, check your calendars. You'll get a, if it hasn't gone out yet, it will go out really soon. The agenda for next week has changed dramatically, and we've got several bill hearings. We'll see you Monday. Oh, Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We didn't get really a chance to discuss the underlying bill, and I don't want to delay things too much, but I guess I just do want to say, since this is recorded, that there was a comment made during testimony that, if the water percentage is too high, for example, and this is mostly unregulated, then it has a chance to turn into mead. I don't really want a bunch of drunk 6-year-olds running around. If that is a possibility in all this, I think this is moving a bit too quick to think about all these things, but just wanted to kind of make that on the record.
Okay, so noted. Representative Clayton.
Thank you. I checked the agenda for next week, but nothing is written yet, which I totally get because staff is busy. But could you kind of clue us into some of the bills that we would be hearing, just so our folks could be aware?
So anything, almost every bill that's been introduced, seems like in the last week or so. Gosh, you'll get the listing here pretty quick.
Medicaid expansion?
That wasn't introduced in this committee. There's nothing I like more than to hear that bill in this committee and crush it, so. But it's not in my committee. All right, we're adjourned.